This has been the most anticipated Minecraft project I've ever done. Throughout 2020, I built my underground kingdom, which so many of you guys loved. Collectively, with all of the planning, building, rendering, and editing, it took over 300 hours to finish. It spanned over several episodes, which accumulated a total of over 5 million views. We're gonna see if we can do something even crazier this year. Now, it's obvious with this size of a project, we're not gonna get it all done in one video. But that's where you guys come in. I need all the help I can get for this project, so I need you guys to go down in the comments and leave your suggestions as to what should be included in the underwater kingdom. Any specific buildings, creatures, or even backstory will help bring this project to life, like we did for the underground kingdom. I want to hear all of it, so comment your ideas and they could be included in this epic build. And if you want to stay up to date with this massive project, then make sure you subscribe. Only 25% of you guys watching are currently subscribed. Your support is the reason I can continue making projects like this and getting you all involved. So make sure to stick around, especially if you want to have any input in this build. And as promised, I am starting a survival let's play series with my girlfriend Steph. In fact, we're doing a series together on both of our channels. The first episode of the TrixyBlox series will be out this Friday, but episode 1 of the StephBlox series is out now, so make sure you go check it out after this video. When working on the underground kingdom, my first priority was creating a large enough cave for the kingdom to reside in. Doing this manually in Minecraft would take an eternity, and whilst World Edit makes things far easier, terraforming on this scale would probably cause my PC to explode. Instead, I use this handy dandy program called World Painter, which is exactly what I've decided to do to create our seabed for this project. When I mentioned earlier we would be building something even crazier than the underground kingdom, I wasn't kidding. This map is 2 times bigger, plus there are no stalagmites taking up large amounts of space, meaning that we've got a lot of space to fill. Jumping in and out of Minecraft to test the terraforming I've been doing really put into perspective the size of this world. I have to double the game's default max render distance just so I can load the entire thing in. Unfortunately, the ocean for this custom map isn't endless, and because World Painter exports and merges this custom map into a regular Minecraft world, I had to build up the terrain to hold what will eventually be full of water. Basically, imagine our custom map like a giant bowl. The terrain literally goes from bedrock level to build height to prevent our ocean from leaking out into the surrounding world. Anyhow, when adding some colour to the terrain, I kept the seabed as sand and made a custom material brush to add a layered effect in the steep cliff faces. This layered pattern was made using a gradient of blocks, and I added some roughness to create a slightly warped effect to make it appear as if the water had slowly corroded away at the rock. Plus, I thought it would make for a more interesting background to the rock faces. As some of you mentioned, the underground kingdom setting was a bit bland, although it had to be in order to keep things realistic. I then gradually blended the sand from the seabed into the rocks and exported the map. This clip shows the sheer scale of this project. With all this space, we can add so much to this build. So, make sure you get this video to 100,000 likes for the next part of this gigantic project. I made large coral reef rocks to scatter throughout the seabed, but unfortunately, the replay mod didn't like the particular World Edit commands I'd used, resulting in a glitchy mess. So here's a quick rundown. Using the blob command, you can make some really interesting shapes, and I thought this would be the perfect way to create a custom setting for our coral reef to live. Since we made the size of our map look pretty nice, I wanted to also give the coral rocks a nice variation of colour. In this clip, you can see I create a sphere and convert each layer of it into a different block type to make a nice gradient. This is going to act as my paintbrush, which I can then use to go full Bob Ross on the beginnings of our coral reef. In this clip, you can see I've added one main coral reef, as well as many other clusters in different areas of the seabed. Much like the mushrooms from the underground kingdom, I had to create a wide variation of coral types to paste around the foundations of the reef we've just created. First off, I start by creating some table coral by laying down these rugged, coloured discs, each varying a little bit in size. Next, I took some inspiration from staghorn coral and make several shape and colour variations. To finish off the coral variants, I take inspiration from several species, including tube coral, brain coral, alcyanacea, and elkhorn coral. I also add a custom seagrass or seaweed. To get the ball rolling, I paste in the seagrass all around the base of the rock clusters. I also make a taller variant of seagrass to make things more dynamic and realistic, pasting that around in the same way. I had to keep the render distance down lower to stop things lagging whilst building, but now that I've turned it back up, you can see the whole ocean floor and all the seaweed we've just added. Things are already starting to look way more realistic. Now, let's start adding all of the coral variants we made earlier. I start with the special types of coral first, specifically the ones that I tried to make as close as possible to the real life species. I wanted the most authentic and true to life types I'd made to be the main feature of the reef. So it made the most sense to focus on positioning these first. I tried to make sure I place things as randomly as possible and in lots of different positions, from the ocean floor all the way up to the tips of the custom rocks. When taking a look back over the footage, I realised how aesthetically pleasing it is to see the reef growing before your eyes, and start to really feel like something you'd see in real life. With everything in place, you can really see how much colour has been added, and how realistic things are starting to look. Obviously, the massive plinth I created in the middle of this world is here for a reason. So let's get to the good bit and start planning out our castle. I start with a giant circle outline of wool to create a boundary for my floor plan. I then start dotting around several different sized circles for different towers. I wanted this to feel very asymmetric, so after placing down the plans for the main towers, I randomly scatter around the bases of some smaller towers. For the main tower, I created a tiered effect at the bottom, which I may adapt later in the series when I come back to this area. Once I reach the center circle, I begin building a tower from cylinders that gradually decrease in size, giving the effect that the towers slope inwards in an organic way, almost like the way that you would shape pottery. I manually adapt the gradual slope for a smoother effect, to add a sturdier foundation at the base of our tower and add a support frame, continuing it all the way up, using prismarine for a pop of colour. At the very top of this tower, I build out a layer to create the top section on an angle. This was quite a challenge in itself, particularly when I started thinking about the shape of the roof. To make my life even harder, I decided that I would make the roof resemble a seashell, to fit with the nautical theme. Atop the slanted roof, which I created with the coquina shell type in mind, I added 3 spiral shells ascending in size. This was my first attempt at the roof colours, initially making it out of crimson materials so that I could use fences and trapdoors to add lots of detail and dimension. I move on to add the windows into the top section before raising the height of the entire tower. I then change the roof to end and purple blocks to stick to a more shell-like pastel palette for the castle, before adding a few windows to the main body of the tower. Next, working from the base, I build up a small tower resembling that of our existing main tower, capping it with the spiral shells from the very top. I add these to each corner of the main tower area, setting them at different heights to maintain the asymmetry I mentioned earlier. Mimicking the style of the main tower, I begin creating the first of 2 side towers. As virtually the only symmetrical part of this build, I created this so that I could paste it to the same position on the other side of the main tower. It is essentially a copy of the main tower, but on a slightly smaller scale so that the main tower stands out from the rest. The top of the tower, however, is the first of many different shell style roofs that you'll see featured atop all of the towers in this build. For this roof, I took inspiration from the cockle and clam shell types, before adding some mini towers capped with the same spiral shells from the main tower. Once again, I add windows to the main body of the tower and the 4 towers surrounding it, in the same way that we did for the main tower. With the left tower complete, I copy it to the other side and decide to create a different shell-inspired roof to sit on top. This roof was inspired by the Trocus shell. As far as looks go, it's a wider and stumpier version of the spiral shell we previously made. And yeah, it does slightly resemble the poop emoji. As I mentioned before, my plan was to place towers as asymmetrically as possible. This means that they vary in size, shape and height, whilst all following the same overall design of the existing towers, so that it appears as one collective piece. As you might have guessed, I took some inspiration from the castle from The Little Mermaid, as I wanted to do something more original than a stereotypical Atlantis-style kingdom. This is why I went for the approach of creating individual, separate towers instead of a regular castle. Funnily enough, this colour palette does remind me of the Underground Kingdom castle, but I think that it was the perfect fit for this marine environment, and there are so many other differences that set the 2 kingdoms apart. They are rivals after all. So, for one of our unique rooftops, I begin working on a nautilus shell. I started by making 3/4 of a sphere, looking a little like Baby Yoda's cradle. I adapt the shape at the bottom to slope inwards, and then tuck the roof in to achieve a spiral effect. I then mix in some purple blocks to add a pattern, which becomes more sparse towards the outer edge of the shell. I then add one of the existing towers onto the opening of the shell, where the creature within would usually emerge. I take the finished shell and place it atop one of the towers, give it some supports, and then mirror across to the other side. Next, I thought I should add a clamshell to these 2 smaller towers at the front of the castle. Once I got the right shape for the open clam, I positioned it appropriately and added a small tower in the place of the pearl that you would usually find inside. I mirror this to the other side, making this one of the few symmetrical features of the castle. For the next roof, I begin by creating spheres to start by building up the shape of a conch style shell. After struggling with the shape for a while and trying to build on an angle, I decided to make things easier on myself and build it vertically, with spheres slowly decreasing in size. I then etch out the opening of the shell, alter the colours so that they match the other existing roofs, and finally rotate the shell on a 30-degree angle. I neatened up the design and positioned the shell atop the tower and add pillar supports. The positioning of the shell and its opening is designed to resemble a sort of balcony, and I think it achieves that look pretty well. It's time to finish the roofs for the remaining towers of the castle. We've made plenty of unique shells to feature atop some of our towers, so for the remaining, I used the cockle and clam shells as inspiration once again, and featured some small towers atop them as well. I've already added windows to the main 3 towers that we previously made, however, I had to now scatter them into the new towers. Thankfully, because the towers all have the same sloped shape, I was able to copy the same window design around without any issues. I realised that so far we hadn't included any lighting, so I changed the world to nighttime and ended up by replacing the glass of the windows with redstone lamps. These redstone lamps will brighten up the castle and actually double as a stained glass window thanks to the block texture. You'll also notice I've added sea lanterns into the shell roofs to make the castle feel like it's alive. Smack bang in the middle of the castle, we still have one of the circles from the planning we made earlier. And what good would an underwater kingdom be without a power source? So, surrounded by some pillars, I place a plinth which would house a conduit. This made perfect sense to me to add, as it's an actual feature of the game. So when we eventually finish the kingdom and fill our ocean, it will actually work and be a usable game mechanic, not just an aesthetic feature. With our castle almost complete, and as a final attempt to make it look organic, I include these winding paths that weave in and out of the towers. It's difficult to show what exactly I'm doing right now, but essentially I'm just carefully plotting out a route using red wool and then using a command to build a line following along it. Then, using small discs of dark prismarine, I gradually widen the pathways and repeat this on all of the lines I previously made, and position them all the way down the gradual sloping path, making sure to space them evenly apart. Now, as soon as I added these support pillars to the winding paths, it all started to come together. They really transform what previously looked like a lot of individual towers into one complete design. The way that they branch off in different directions makes them almost appear like veins, or a part of the terrain itself. Anyway, with all of that, let's see what we've achieved so far in our underwater kingdom. Well, what do you guys think of the kingdom so far and what should be added? Remember to leave your suggestions down in the comments as your input is essential, guys. I want to make this a community project, so get brainstorming. Also, thought I'd mention, I won't be putting this up for download on my Patreon until it's complete. So you better make sure we reach that like goal so we can get started on the next part. Also, a very quick little announcement. I'm currently hosting a building competition over on the TrixyBlox Discord. There's a cash prize for my favorite build, plus I'll be choosing another submission and be transforming it for my next big build video. So if you want a chance to feature on the channel, then head on over to the Discord. I'll leave a link to it down below in the description. I've also got a second channel now, TrixyBlox Shorts. I'm going to be posting mini builds, shortened versions of my current videos, and even some tutorials in the future. So make sure you go check it out. Anyway, with all of that done, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.